Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Psychology and Spirituality, a Bridge to a Better Life discussion. I'm your host, Marcia Trajano, and with me is my good friend, Peter Hayes, who comes back with us in our program. And just to briefly introduce him, Peter is the president of the Spiritist group Love and Light in Newark, New Jersey. It is so good to have you back with us, Peter. And for those of you who are joining us now, please note that this is a podcast like program. And in this program, the Psychology and Spirituality Weekly Talks, we are focusing on the works by Joanna de Angelis so that we're able to equip all of us, you and me and Peter, toward a safe space to perhaps confront, compare, correlate, and most importantly, expand spirituality concepts from this psychological lens and be able to perhaps bring insights, actionable tips, and even some real world advice to help all of us lead a better life. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Spiritist Group Love and Light. And to know more about that organization, please visit www.loveandlightnj.org. And our program is sponsored by AMI Brazil, by the TV Mansão do Caminho, by the International Spiritist Council, and the United States Spiritist Federation. Thank you, all of you, sponsor organizations, for one more episode that we come together. But for you that has come to this place to listen to us, and I appreciate you, please make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already done so. And if you'd like to check more information about this topic, please do check us out at spiritist.us. Finally, if you have any questions, any feedback, any critique, anything that you would like to share with us, do write it down in the chat window, and your questions or even topics will be perhaps aired at a later episode. But Peter, back to you, Peter. We're here today to discuss the idea that we all are living in fear. And at the same time that I say that, it's important for us to stop a moment, to pause a moment, because fear is one of the four basic human emotions. The other emotions, or the four of them, are joy in a positive manner. In our society, we consider that to be very positive emotion, but it also includes sadness, anger, and fear, right? And I love, maybe, Peter, to say those are the we used to say fight or flight, right? But it really fight or flight or fight or freeze, right? So when you fight is really motivated by your anger emotion. The flight is that fear, right? That you need to be able to get the adrenaline pumping into you so you can get out in fear. And the third one, which is freeze, the three F's, is really more like when we are so compelled by sadness that we somehow, right, we freeze. We are unresponsive mostly to the external environment. But anyways, why am I saying this? Because it's ingrained in the DNA of us all human beings. So, recapping, fear is a basic human emotion, right? And it is a trigger, really a good, important trigger to help us all to survive. If you think about it, it's mostly an unpleasant emotion, don't you think, Peter? It's not good to feel fear, but if you think about it, it is triggered by a belief or reality. Both can be just your imagination or reliving a situation, say, for those that have had a trauma, right? Just to relive that trauma, or the reality that someone or something is dangerous,
Right.
that someone or something is going to cause some sort of pain,
Mhm.
physical or emotional pain, and that something or someone can be a threat to move you out of your stability, and we're not equipped to confront them. So,
Mhm.
just to finalize here, Peter, I often joke that with this notion that yes, we are afraid, and yes, it's a survival mechanism, but we no longer live in the African savannah where we could be right now the innocent prey to perhaps lionesses in the middle of a hunt.
Mhm.
Peter, this goes back to you. The mic is yours. I'd love to hear from you. What what causes fear in our modern society, right? Our modern life. And most important, why do we live in fear, right? We live lives that are just commonly laced with fear.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Um, well, modern life, of course, is extremely complex. Um, and as you were alluding to before, you mentioned we don't have the same kinds of dangers, most of us, I would say, that we our ancestors had from
Yeah.
centuries and centuries ago, um, where the chance of being attacked by an animal, for instance, was greater. We did not have adequate shelter to protect us against not only animals but the elements. Naturally, we still face these problems with the elements, um, as homes are often destroyed and things like that.
Mhm.
Um, I mention this because, in some ways, the fears we have now in modern life are they drastically different from fears from long ago? Yes and no. You mentioned uh, being attacked by an animal. I was thinking also, if you go back to this country's history, when the earliest settlers, there was always the possibility of attack from others,
Mhm.
either fellow settlers or in some cases indigenous peoples and things like that. Certainly, disease was
Mhm.
something that people must have been very afraid of because people were more vulnerable to disease in the past than we are now. But having said that, we still have lots of diseases. And then, if we look at the complexity of modern life, driving everywhere
Yeah.
certainly is the chances of injury or death, and we're more likely to suffer from a car accident, either fatally or severely injured, than we are than to say be attacked by a total stranger. And if we have fears about crime, well, there are reasons why that does, obviously it happens and it's legitimate. But if one's, say, terrified of being murdered by a stranger, you're far more likely to be murdered by a family member,
Yeah.
statistically speaking. But the thing about fear is we need, I mean, thank God we have the reaction of fear, because if we didn't, we would not be able to survive. Fear is a protective mechanism that helps
Mhm.
to get ourselves out of danger. However, fear also is something that can be easily distorted. Phobias, all kinds of phobias that phobia by definition are often distortions of realities. So if you're terrified of, I don't know, dogs, for instance, that may be rooted in an actual experience, but the way we turn it into something much worse and be fearful of all kinds of either dogs or cats or whatever animal we might be afraid of, as if every single animal that represents that particular species is a danger. Um, I mean, I was attacked by a German Shepherd when I was a kid.
Oh
Not,
no.
but it
Mm.
Did it make me terrified of dogs? No, it didn't. But I do know people who are deeply terrified of dogs. And it's, where does that come from? Was it based on personal experience? As spiritists, we can ask, since we believe in reincarnation, is it based
Uh-huh.
on a prior experience and so forth?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of times, fear is either, um, it maybe is a little hard to distinguish when fear is rooted in a genuine reality in which we should be cautious and careful, and other times where we've exaggerated fears. And it depends on what type of fear we have. If we're afraid of certain people, for instance, is that because we've distorted who they are in our minds? How much is fear connected to projection? And by projection, I mean a psychological trait or behavior in which we exaggerate uh, a certain perception that we have that has little to do with reality.
Mm-hmm.
So if I have fears of certain individuals, if I don't know that person that well, and I don't have a realistic reason to be afraid of that person, then I may be making up all kinds of assumptions about that person, projections, in other words. Um, and that can happen in a variety of ways. But let's take something very commonplace. What about fear of rejection, which
Yes.
we've all experienced? Uh, in her book, Existential Conflicts, Joanna de Angelis mentions in passing um, that fear of rejection is certainly up there, especially if we have a romantic interest in someone and we could be afraid that they don't feel the same way back. And being rejected that way is an awful feeling. There's you know no pretending around it, especially if we haven't experienced that too
Uh-huh.
often and we're not used to being rejected. Of course, if we're attracted to somebody, we want that person to reciprocate. Um, it makes us feel sad. It affects our self esteem. We feel
Mm-hmm.
humiliated and everything else that we may be going through as a result of that person rejecting us. But does that mean we should never seek someone out or try to pursue someone that we're interested in? By pursue, I mean do it within respectable boundaries, but nevertheless
Yes.
take the risk of I'm interested in that person, and so I'm going to see if maybe I can get closer to that person. Um, One way to confront fear of rejection would be to experience it and keep trying. Um, this is just one example, by the way, but if we're
Mm-hmm.
terrified of rejection, chances are we need to go through it so that we can actually experience what it really feels like to be rejected. And it can be an awful feeling, but we also, God willing, will wake up and realize I got through it. My
Yes.
life did not come to an end despite
It's
the.
all about fortitude, right, Peter? As we go through an experience, we become stronger through it. And I believe in the same book that you quoted, she mentioned that the three uh, biggest fears, and it's just very interesting. One is fear of dying.
Okay.
And if you are someone who believes in reincarnation, that's not so much a fear any longer, right? The mortal body dies, but you don't as a spirit. But
Right.
nevertheless, we all have that instinctive fear of death, the fear of rejection, as you mentioned so well, and of course the fear of failing. And the fear of failing, I like to bring it up, perhaps the notion that it's really an egoic construct.
Mm-hmm.
What are we afraid of failing for, right? Why is it so critical? And it is this, we don't want to shatter the persona that the ego so carefully crafted to to make sure that the external world will recognize us as a successful person, etc., etc. And
Right.
as we fail, just this terrible fear comes in. Just want to let you know, in my environment of work, right?
Mhm.
Um, and this is mostly a gender based, or at least those that are shared with me. The question of mental health and anxiety is so prevalent, Peter, and it really, it's disheartening to me to see why are we all living in fear. But if we break down, number one, that is perfectly perfectly normal, right? Perfectly normal. We all have fears, and it's actually good because it's a survival mechanism. But number two, as we see those three main fears out there, um, number one, number two, number three, and those are all things that we should be able to be equipped to manage that, to
Mhm.
handle that. But can you perhaps give me some examples of those additional fears that just that we all live? I think I was thinking, Peter, that and this is in not just in North America, but in the US for the past, what, 15 years, the idea of active shooters have been creeping up in urban societies,
Right.
and it comes to our worst type of fears, which is I go to a movie theater and I'm relaxed in the dark and somebody shoots at us, or I go dancing, or the worst of it all, my kids go to school, to a protected place to learn, and they may not survive. So I cringe every time I have to go through this annual active shooter training to learn to, right, to be what to do in the
Right.
case of an active shooter in my work environment. And this is terrible because, in my opinion, we should be strong and we should create that sense of trust. And as Christians, we really understand the biblical words, right? That we should not worry. We should have faith in this infinite mercy of God, that nothing bad will happen to us. Instead, we just going through so many pressures, Peter, in society. It's just terrible.
Mhm.
Uh, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Wow. Um, because fears like that, it probably wouldn't matter if you looked at it statistically and could prove, from a
Yeah,
mathematical perspective, what are the odds that you would be a victim of something
yeah,
horrible like
true.
that. But
Hmm.
at the same time, it does happen, and people really are suffering as a result of it. The
Yeah.
family, of course, the victims, and so forth, those who survive. Um, and it's, I think maybe a question we could ask ourselves is, we could certainly think of all kinds of things that could happen to us,
Hmm.
but do we have no choice but to fixate on them? Because if we're so paranoid and fearful of everything that might potentially happen, then we would never leave our homes.
Correct.
And who's to say we're safe in our homes, for that matter?
Well, and I keep thinking here, right, when you say that, well, if you start to be very evidence based, right, or statistical evidence based on how we need to protect ourselves. And in I live in a city, you live in a city, so let's use that.
Right.
Let's go ahead and start using mechanism to mitigate from being attacked, say, right?
Mhm.
So it's urban, there's urban violence, there are criminals. What do we do, right? We don't want our well-being, our family well-being, and sense of security, or even the assets that you so carefully worked for, earned for, and now have to taken away to be stolen. And can you imagine? We end up um, building walls that are taller and have more and more sophisticated security systems. And but all we're doing is, and I'm being very free thinking here, Peter, but we're really creating walls that imprison us and may lead to increasing isolation, right? And with that increased isolation, we may also lose our sense of self, a sense of place, a sense of perhaps identity,
Mhm.
right? And that may lead to even more a sense of insecurity and fear that may lead to phobias and other pathological types of uh, states.
And so that kind of approach or reaction to be
Hmm.
to wall ourselves off, not only does it not make us more secure, it might actually perpetuate other types of emotions that could uh, affect our bodies
Yeah,
and so forth. And so,
yeah.
irony of that approach, that kind of paranoid reaction,
Hmm.
may wind up shortening our lives rather than prolonging.
Absolutely, absolutely, right? Our mental health will be impacted, and our physical health may also be impacted. And at the end of the day, despite of all those um, physical constructs to help us, will actually lead us to a worse state,
Right.
right? Yeah.
One of the root causes of fear. I don't know if it's a root cause, but I'm thinking off the top of my head here a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Is the feeling that we must have security and we can never experience surprise. We must always know what to expect before it happens. That we somehow can't live with the unexpected, which is not realistic, of course,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But sometimes people are so fearful of a lot of different things that they really are afraid to step out into the world, so to speak. They become agoraphobics.
Yeah.
Because again, you could imagine all the sorts of things that might happen. But that's also a preoccupation with the future.
Yes.
Part of developing spirituality is to learn how to really live in the moment, how to move
Absolutely.
from one
Yeah.
moment to the next and not be obsessing about the future. You know, we're all going to have problems. The difference is how do we react to the problems? We may experience certain tragedies that are really, really bad, but how do we react to them? And sometimes when we really are faced with a genuine danger, we're more resilient than we give ourselves credit for,
That's true. Yeah,
right?
that's true.
Um, if we're caught off guard in some way, if somebody attacks us, God forbid, but if it happens, are we able to somehow respond in which we get out of the situation? Or maybe um, we're not as vulnerable or weak as we assume we might be.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, Peter, I wanted to, I don't know if you are okay with this, but I wanted to maybe pivot our conversation about living with fear with something very interesting from the works of Joanna de Angelis, specifically in the book The Integral Human. No, no, not the integral human being. I'm sorry. With the existential conflicts, she has an entire chapter around fear. Both books do. But in existential conflicts, she starts her chapter, and I invite all of you to, if you haven't done so, to perhaps consider either borrowing or purchasing that book. It's just really an amazing compendium of discussions on what ails society, what ails all of us as human beings in many different chapters. And they each chapter, it gives us the problem, but also potential solutions. But
Mm,
in that book, she starts to talk about something that's super interesting to me, specifically, which is the notion of the state of humanity today, and we're talking about where we are right now, which is really a transitional type of world, spiritually speaking. But at this point, we are finally, almost as if the metaphor would be, we're no longer children, right? And we're becoming perhaps young adults. So there's this whole notion of a maturity coming to us. But with that maturity is the term that she uses beautifully is the conscious, the expansion of our consciousness, right? Which is this awakening of our true ourself, in beyond our ego. And she talks about in the book, in the chapter, that in doing so, and it's the perhaps a paradox in the thought process, by expanding who we are, we actually let it come to the surface, all the things that in the past we were unable to confront, and
mhm,
now they start to surface.
mhm,
So one of the things that comes are really, well, my past, either in another lifetime or in this lifetime, but I have repressed. There's certain dose of guilt, a certain dose of shame, perhaps, and as I am now dealing with that in this transition, and it's still awakening, right? Still not there in terms of our psychological maturity, spiritual maturity either. We are coming to terms, or coming to feel guilt, shame, and with that, the fear that those feelings bring to us in our day-to-day lives, right? So, for example, um, if I'm feeling guilty or even ashamed, and you start to operate in the famous imposter syndrome, right? The famous, I'm going to fake it until I make it, but underneath I know that I'm not going to make it because I'm not there yet. And it's self-doubt,
mhm,
self-questioning, guilt, and the big four-letter word, fear, right? Fear that I'm going to be found out, fear that I'm going to fail, fear that I'm not going to succeed. So I think it's very interesting for us to see that in this whole discussion, it's a good part
mhm,
from the ancestral past, which is fear is there to help us survive. And now that we're progressing, and we're talking about many, many, many lifetimes, thousands of years that we have survived as an immortal spirit, we're
mhm,
now confronting the fact that we are mature enough, spiritually speaking, to start to have to deal with things that we couldn't in the past. But the fear that is there is actually something that we should look carefully, confront it carefully, be kind to ourselves, right? Recognize that we are afraid,
right,
but to be prepared to whatever means necessary. Is it through prayer? Is it through therapy? Is it even in some cases medication? But what is it that's going to help us calm
mhm.
down, right? Breathe, be able to breathe, to be in peace, to establish a balance in ourselves, so that we're able to be the David against the Goliath of our lives, right?
In order to expand our consciousness, I would say the following. The capacity we have for remorse
Yeah.
and at times guilt is a wake up call. I did something in the past that I
Yeah.
wish I had not done. I hurt certain people, and I do feel badly about it. Hopefully, that'll lead to me also going, I won't do it again. And if I
Yes.
make amends with that person I hurt, by all means do so. Certainly, Jesus stresses that. Jesus stresses it by saying, if your brother's taking you to the courthouse, so to speak, before the judge, you should make amends before you get there, or you will go to jail and you won't get out till you pay every last penny, which is a metaphoric way of expressing that the more we avoid taking responsibility, the more we live with the consequences of that.
Mm-hmm.
The Jewish holiday Yom Kippur is all about atonement. And people are
Yes.
encouraged every year that they go through that high holiday to make amends. To if we've offended somebody or we have a problem with somebody, actively seek that person out and try to resolve it if we can. So remorse, again, is a mechanism that helps us to wake up, so to speak. And as we expand our consciousness, the capacity to experience remorse, I think the intention of it is it's more of a something we pass through. We
Mm-hmm.
go through it long enough so that it does lead to a deeper transformation, which includes taking responsibility and also being more mindful about
Yeah.
not to do versus what we can do. Guilt, however, can be a little different. Guilt and remorse could be the same as long as it doesn't go on too long. But if we feel guilty, 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 guilty,
Uh-huh.
that turns into a mask. Maybe we feel guilty, in quotes, to deflect criticism. I'm going to feel terribly guilty about what I did. Oh, I'm sorry, Marcia. I didn't mean to do such and such. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And my message to you is don't criticize me. Don't tell me what I'm, don't confront me, please. So that is a mask. Guilt could also be anger in disguise. You know, I'm sorry I hurt you, but in some ways I'm not sorry I hurt you. So it's a kind of thing where I'm not really in touch with my feelings. So just to repeat, I would say remorse and guilt, if they don't go on too long, then they might be almost interchangeable. But if guilt just goes on and on and on, then it can turn into a mask. But the way to confront it is that we have to take responsibility, no matter how uncomfortable that makes us, and have the courage to admit when we've done something wrong. And going back to fear, um, if we try to make amends with somebody and they just, you know, refuse, then at least we've tried, and that does help us to free ourselves in a way. Um, it's not fun to go through that, obviously, but um, but again, do we have the courage to seek to not only feel guilty and have remorse, but to then seek a way to resolve whatever happened? Seeking forgiveness, certainly, if we need to, but also just having the courage to experience whatever the reaction of that person really is. If we are operating with this attitude that we must fix everything, we can't have anybody upset with us, God forbid. Sometimes we simply can't. Sometimes we rubbed somebody the wrong way, or we punched, we crossed a line with that person, and we're done with them. They're done with us, I should say, and we have to accept that. Um, so guilt also is, I think in a way, guilt would be close to an inability to forgive, because the more you can't forgive someone, the more you're hanging on to an event, most likely from the past, to the
Mm-hmm.
point that it starts eating away at you. It's like the snake eating its own tail,
Yeah.
right? So guilt, again, can have a similar kind of effect where it becomes non-productive to the extent that it's a wake-up call, just to repeat that point.
Yeah.
Uh, then it can help us. Um, but are we really meant to go through life just feeling perpetually guilty about everything?
It's our choice, right? It's our choice in terms of can we the ultimate act of love is to perform self love, and as we know, we are our worst enemies. Therefore, we end up failing ourselves, our expectations, etc., etc. And so, with that, that means for us to be able to exercise self love, love the other, love ourselves, we need to learn to forgive. Learn to forgive simply means we need to understand our limitations
Mhm.
and create in the same vein that our Father gives us many, 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 many chances to learn, to relive
Right.
a circumstance, etc., that we can do the same to ourselves. So it's this sense of a
Mm.
love and mercy and forgiveness. They're all intertwined, right, Peter?
Right, because if we can't forgive through an act of self-love, then we could stay wallowing in guilt and therefore perpetuating fears.
Yes.
Maybe that's the reason why in that chapter you mentioned, chapter 4 on fear,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
existential conflicts, it ends with Joanna de Angelis stressing that love is the way to overcome fear.
Yes. Yes.
If
Can you
we could,
explain more about it for those that may not understand
I,
what, Peter? Love, right? What is the antithesis to fear is love. Let's talk about it.
I think you were just touching on it because you
Yeah.
mentioned self-love.
Yes.
Self-love means, okay, I did something wrong. I do feel badly about it. I wish I could, make amends somehow.
Uh-huh.
I love myself enough that I'm not going to beat myself up about it endlessly.
Yes.
Because if I beat myself up endlessly, that's a sign of immaturity.
Mhm.
At the same time, if I do not apologize and I
Mhm.
don't feel guilty and I rationalize, that too is immaturity because I'm refusing to take responsibility. But self love is acknowledging that we are all going to foul up over and over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But it's okay, you know, as long as we are learning the lessons and we do our best not to repeat certain behaviors. But the chances are we will. We'll probably make the same mistake more than once. But
Mhm.
we, at least learning as we go through this and developing a strong enough sense of who we are that we don't just blindly repeat the same behavior again and again and again. And self love helps us to have the courage to let go and accept that we have not done everything perfectly. It's frustrating when we realize we could have made certain choices that would have been better. And it's humiliating when we realize we've fouled up or we didn't see something in the past that now is very obvious to us. Hindsight is 2020, as they say,
Correct.
right?
Mhm.
But if we can learn to free ourselves through self-love, and again, that's not narcissism.
Uh-huh.
It's about helping ourselves to free ourselves from turning a past event into such a distorted event in our psyche that it's like a case of the past really interfering with the present. And
obsessively so, right? In some cases, it could
you're
be trauma as one of the most common ones, but even if it's not a traumatic event, we can fall prey to our own fixed ideas, and that ideation, it just keeps churning our heads and becomes another prison, right? Another shackle that we put to ourselves.
because how often are we making decisions based upon limited knowledge?
Ah,
So
good
when
point.
mistakes we make, business mistakes, for instance, is one example. You made certain choices based upon what you knew at the time. And sometimes we make choices that work out, and other times we realize we made choices in which there were flaws in our decision making because we didn't have all the information we knew. And still, it can be frustrating and humiliating, but
Mm.
at the same time, um, can we forgive ourselves for doing that? And life is so much, going back to fear, it is impossible for any of us to have a full perspective about everything we might encounter. It's just not going to happen. In a
Can
way,
can I can I interrupt you just to give you a personal example, Peter? Sorry for that, but I was thinking, right? I by trade I am a project manager,
mhm,
and the biggest value that a project manager brings to an organization is what we call risk management. What is risk management? Is simply put the exercise of logging all the what they call known unknowns. What is a known unknown? It's something that you already know
mhm,
that can happen, but it's unknown because it may not happen, right?
mhm,
It may happen in the future, but it has not happened yet. So it is a known unknown, and that unknown can be, I don't know, in construction, a project which I don't work in that, but let's pretend I am. Working in your neck of the woods in the northeast of the US, where temperatures can drop,
mhm,
and you are finishing a house and you have to do the external paint job and temperatures start to freeze early. That's a risk.
mhm.
That's a potential failure to your project to if it gets too cold. So by logging those issues and by creating a plan of attack, if you will, then you minimize the impacts of all of the things that could come and make your project not do that. But there's another component in project management, which is there is known unknown. There's also an unknown unknown,
Mhm.
right? Who could have predicted that the world would go through a pandemic,
Yeah.
right? And you could say, yes, there are predictions, but you did not really put that as something that's going to happen and it's going to stop people from going to work, stop, just paralyze an entire world, entire society was impacted by that.
And
Or
so
lately, yeah, go ahead.
it happened so fast that you would have had
Yes.
timed preventative measures almost perfectly.
Yeah, and like Katrina in 2005, right? The floods in the south of Brazil that came and just near an entire state got underwater. And you can think, who would have thought it would rain so much to that proportion that an entire state would be underwater, right? Mostly underwater. So those are the things that in project we call unknown unknowns, and for that you have contingencies, right? You prepare by putting a reserve. Let's think perhaps what can be our contingencies. And our contingencies in emotional health, in mental health, could be seek help,
Mhm.
right? If you feel that your fears, and you mention a couple, are nearing a logical state, seek help is there in so many forms. Seek
Right.
help. And if it's not there, but still impacting your life, let's think about what are the things that Joanna gives to us, right? We talked about the practice self-love, self-forgiveness, but
Mhm.
even a prayer or calling someone in your social network that can just hold your hands, even if it is virtually, right? Hold your hands while you're talking to the person on the phone. Like, I'm not well. Can we talk it through? Because as we talk it through, we start to see we are not in the savannah, in the Sahara, and a lioness is not hunting us.
Right. Right.
Most of the things that are coming at us can be rationalized, and we are able to address those.
Something else I would add to all of this that I was thinking,
Yeah.
going back to being hunted by a lioness, for instance.
Yeah.
Obviously, we human beings are vulnerable.
Yes.
And if we go up against a lion, we're going to lose. I think it's safe to say, but
Yeah.
we do have something to, the human body is very powerful in many ways and very resourceful in many ways. But
Hmm.
the thing that we have, and I think you were connecting to this indirectly, is our intelligence and our capacity for reason, our capacity for thinking our way through a problem.
And
I,
resilience, right? Resilience to be
I
able to understand and
think
come
that
back. Yeah.
help seek it out, that kind of thing. Um, and so much of fear is when we are imagining ourselves to be in situations where we're completely and utterly helpless to do anything about it. I mean, how many movies are out there that are rooted in some type of fear?
Yes.
Popular Jaws,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
instance.
Yeah.
People were afraid to go into the ocean after that movie came out, or go
I
into
was. I was right there.
movies like Jurassic Park. Imagine if
Yeah.
we were living side by side with the dinosaurs. That kind of thing. Um, how unstable that would be. The only way we could defend ourselves is to use our intelligence,
That's right.
that kind of thing. Um, so, and yet the irony of that is we also can use our thinking to exaggerate problems and make them worse than they really are. Um, so it's kind of a paradox. But as you were saying, we have the ability to come up with solutions. We can seek help. We're not isolated. And we can use our resources in a variety of ways to get ourselves out of situations or work through problems that we're currently facing. And we may come up with solutions that were not so obvious at the beginning. And that's also part of the beauty of confronting fear, is that when we begin to work our way through something that's fearful to us, we may discover all kinds of ways of getting through it that never would have occurred to us
Yeah.
unless we actually took the steps to do so.
Absolutely.
Uh,
Absolutely.
mhm.
We are at time. Look at that. Our conversations is so nice, and that I could be talking to you forever. But Peter, I want to say thank you for sharing your thoughts, your knowledge, your awareness of this thing called fear. And my words to everyone who's here with us today is let's be good to each other. Let's
Mhm.
love each other, love oneself, love the other, but also as an amazing writer, Joseph Campbell, brought to us the image of the journey of the hero, right? You
Hero,
cannot, yeah, right. The many of his books that he brings that notion of the hero, and the hero doesn't exist if you do not go through a situation
mhm,
that it is one that you're not yet or don't know that you're equipped to do it. So for me, that the hero's journey is it's really well exemplified by the in biblical terms, David and Goliath, the young boy against the giant, right? And the intelligence, like you said, the resourcefulness, the resilience, but most important, despite it all, he got up to confront it. And I think that's the call today is let us confront our fears, because
Mhm.
at the root of it all is our consciousness is being awakened,
Mhm.
and which means we are evolving, we are maturing, we are becoming better. So I love all of it, despite of all the points and counterpoints, the paradoxes found in this discussion. But I want to say thank you, Peter, so much for being here with me, and
Thank
we'll see you again next time.
you. Okay. Thank you. It's been a
Bye
pleasure.
bye, everyone.
Bye bye.